Everett Drummond had not spoken to his 2 sons in 11 days when he placed the envelopes on the kitchen table and walked away without explanation. There were 3 of them, white, letter-sized, unremarkable, 1 for each son. 1 for the man who had built Drummond Logistics from a single flatbed truck and a fuel card he'd maxed out before the first delivery was complete into a freight operation moving goods across 14 states. Inside each envelope, $80 in cash, a handwritten note with 1 line, 7 days. Figure it out, no credit cards, no access to the company accounts, no coming home. Everett had turned 61 in February and spent most of the month sitting in the office of his accountant going over numbers that made no sense to him. Not because he didn't understand numbers, he understood them better than most, but because the numbers told a story about his sons that he had been avoiding reading for the better part of 3 years. The company was profitable. The sons were not. Nathaniel was 34. He held the title of operations director, a title Everett had created when Nathaniel asked for it, which should have been the first signal. In 3 years, he had modernized the route optimization software, attended every industry conference within driving distance, and hired 12 people, 4 of whom had since left without being replaced. He spoke in the language of scale and efficiency, and presented quarterly projections with the confidence of a man who believed that talking about a thing was the same as doing it. He ordered lunch for the office every Friday and never failed to copy the whole team on the email, a move Everett had watched long enough to recognize as performance rather than generosity. Theo was 29. He had been living in the apartment above the company garage for 2 years on a salary that Everett had agreed to while telling himself it was temporary. Theo called it finding his footing. Everett had started to wonder whether Theo's feet had ever actually touched ground. He was smart in the way that people are smart when smartness has never been required to produce anything. He could hold a conversation on almost any subject. He fixed things around the property when he felt like it. He did not feel like it often. Everett had a 3rd person at the table that Sunday night when he handed out the envelopes. Though he didn't live in the house and didn't work for the company, his name was Gil Navarro, and he ran a mobile tool sharpening service out of a van he'd bought used from a restaurant supply auction 7 years ago. He drove routes through the commercial kitchen district of Houston 3 days a week and spent the other 2 working a wholesale flower market off the highway, where he sharpened pruning shears and harvest knives. He made $53,000 a year and kept the books himself in a spiral notebook on the passenger seat of the van. Everett had met him at a diner 11 months ago when Gil had asked to borrow Everett's phone charger and ended up sitting across from him for 2 hours talking about margin and overhead. Gil was not given an envelope. He was there because Everett had asked him to witness, and because the sons needed to understand that the man sitting quietly at the edge of the table was an example of something. Though Everett did not say that out loud, Nathaniel looked at his envelope the way he looked at most things the first time, as though it might contain an opportunity. He turned it over. He looked at the note. He said, "Dad, this is symbolic, right?" It was not a question so much as an offer, a way of giving Everett an exit from something Nathaniel had already decided was not serious. Everett said nothing. Theo read his note twice and put it in his pocket and did not say anything, which was its own kind of answer. He left the table before the others. Everett heard him go upstairs. He did not come back down. Gil looked at his coffee. Everett looked at the envelopes. Monday started at sunrise. Nathaniel Drummond had stayed in hotels with lobbies that smelled like premium candles and front desk staff, who called him Mr. Drummond without being asked. He had flown business class on the company card to a logistics summit in Atlanta. He had eaten at a restaurant in downtown Houston, where the appetizers cost what some people paid for a full week of groceries. He stood on the sidewalk outside his apartment building at 7 in the morning with $80 in his wallet, and understood for the first time that he did not know what things cost when you actually had to pay for them yourself. He spent the first day the way people spend the first day of something they don't believe is real. He ate breakfast at a diner on Westheimer, tipped as he normally tipped, and walked back to his car before remembering that his car was still in the lot under his building, because Everett had made clear that cars were part of the apparatus. He took the bus for the first time since college. He missed the stop and walked 6 blocks back in dress shoes that were not designed for walking 6 blocks on concrete. By Tuesday afternoon, he had spent $41 and had nothing particular to show for it. He called his college friend Warren, who had a guest room in Montrose and enough goodwill to offer it, without making Nathaniel feel the weight of the asking, which was itself a form of generosity Nathaniel had not earned, and was only now beginning to understand the texture of. He sat in Warren's guest room on Tuesday evening with his laptop open, draft emails to 3 contacts in the logistics industry. No asks, just networking, he told himself, just staying warm. He stared at them. He did not send them. Something about the week had shifted the way those emails felt, and he was still working out exactly what. Theo left the apartment above the garage at 6:30 with his jacket and the $80 and no plan, which was not unusual for him, except that the absence of a safety net underneath the no plan was unfamiliar in a way that hit him in the chest about 40 minutes into his first walk through the neighborhood. He had a friend named Soren who kept a couch available for people who needed it. Not as a permanent arrangement, just as a fact of Soren's life, the door was usually open. Theo showed up at 8, and Soren made coffee and did not ask why, and Theo appreciated that more than he could have said. He spent Monday and Tuesday drifting. That was the honest word for it. He walked. He sat in a park. He went to the public library and read 2 chapters of a book about sailing that he would not have chosen in any other context, and found he couldn't stop. He ate cheap. He was good at cheap in a way that surprised him, good at finding the places where a few dollars fed you something real. He had always known where those places were, he just hadn't needed them. Wednesday, he was in a taqueria on Navigation Boulevard, the kind of place with hand-lettered signs and a line that moved fast, when the man at the counter ahead of him came up short. He was counting coins out of his jacket pocket, taking his time, the counterman watching with the practiced patience of someone who had seen this before. Theo reached past him and handed over $2 without thinking about it, the same way you'd catch a thing that was falling. The man looked at him. Theo shrugged. The man's name was Ruben Castillo. He had driven a delivery route for a food distributor for 19 years and had been let go 4 months ago when the company switched to a smaller fleet and a younger dispatch roster. He was 58. He ate his tacos at the counter and Theo sat beside him, and they talked for almost 2 hours, not about the job or the layoff or any of the things Theo expected the conversation to be about, but about Ruben's son in El Paso, who had just learned to read at age 7 after 2 years of struggling, and about the particular quality of early morning light on the Gulf Coast, and about what it felt like to drive the same route for nearly 2 decades and know every pothole, every traffic pattern, every shortcut through the warehouse district. Ruben talked about his work the way people talk about something they had genuinely loved, not the job as a category, but the specific physical reality of it. The weight of the route, the logic of the load sequence, the satisfaction of delivering everything on time and returning the truck to the yard with nothing left to account for. Theo wrote nothing down. He was not the kind of person who wrote things down, but he sat with that conversation afterward, the way you sit with something that has rearranged something inside you. Not dramatically, just perceptibly. The way a room looks different after you move one piece of furniture. Nathaniel spent Wednesday morning in a coffee shop with a notepad working through what he was calling a strategic framework for the week, which was another way of saying he was making a document about a problem instead of addressing it. He had $39. He had a confirmed place to sleep. He was not in genuine difficulty, and the absence of genuine difficulty had allowed him to convert the week into an intellectual exercise, which was more or less what he did with everything. The coffee shop closed at 2. He walked out into the afternoon with his notepad and the particular flatness of a person who has analyzed something thoroughly and come no closer to feeling it. He sat on a bench in Menil Park and watched people for a while, a thing he did not normally do because he was normally moving between places, between tasks, always in transit from one item on the calendar to the next. A woman walked by with a stroller and a phone to her ear, and a grocery bag that was one handle away from failing. The bag split. Oranges went across the path. Nathaniel was standing before he registered that he had decided to stand. He gathered the oranges, handed them back, held the stroller while she reorganized the bag and shifted the phone. She said thank you and was gone in under a minute. He sat back down. He did not know why that had happened, the standing up, the gathering, the holding, in the way that you don't know why certain things come easily and others require enormous effort. He had spent 3 years directing a team of people and had become very skilled at delegating the physical reality of problems to someone else. He was beginning to wonder what he had lost in the practice. By Thursday, he had $31 and a restlessness that had nothing to do with money. He called Warren and asked if there was anything that needed doing around the house, not because he felt he owed labor for the room, but because he needed to do something with his hands. Warren's gutters had been pulling away from the fascia since the last storm. Nathaniel spent the afternoon on a borrowed ladder with a drill and galvanized screws, resetting brackets, resealing the corners. He did not know gutters particularly well. He looked up what he needed on his phone and did the rest by feel. When he finished, his hands were dirty and his back hurt and the gutters were aligned and draining correctly. He stood in Warren's driveway and looked up at them for longer than the task required. Something about the specificity of it, the problem was this, the fix was that, and now the problem was gone. Felt different from anything he had done in months at work. At work, problems were managed. They were rarely solved. They moved from one quarter's report to the next in progressively sophisticated language. Theo found the community garden on Thursday by accident. He had been walking the long way back from the library, through the streets east of Soren's place, when he smelled cut herbs and turned toward the smell, the way you turn toward something that the body recognizes before the mind catches up. The garden occupied a corner lot that had once been a vacant property. Raised beds, a water cistern, a shed with tools hanging inside on pegboard hooks. A woman named Vera. He would later learn her full name was Vera Quintana, which he remembered because it sounded like something worth remembering. Was working a bed of tomato plants with the particular efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough that efficiency and enjoyment had merged into the same motion. She was maybe 70. She did not look up when Theo walked through the gate, but she said, "There's a pair of gloves on the third hook if you want them." He put on the gloves. He did not ask what needed doing. He looked at what was clearly not done and began doing it. He turned compost for an hour. He cut back the overgrown edges of 2 beds with hand shears. Slow work, requires attention, the kind that quiets the other noise. He hauled a cracked planter from the back corner to the pile by the gate. Vera brought him water at some point and sat on an upturned crate nearby, and they talked in the easy way that people talk when they are both doing something, and the conversation is beside the point, without being beside the point. She had been gardening this lot for 11 years. She had started it herself after the previous property sat abandoned for 4 years, and the neighborhood asked the city for the land, and the city, in one of its rarer moments of responsiveness, agreed. She funded it through a small grant and a larger amount of stubbornness. She knew every person who had worked in this garden over a decade. She knew what they had planted and what had failed, and what had surprised her. She said, "Most people come through here looking for something and can't name it. That's fine. You don't have to name it to find it." Theo did not say anything, but he stayed until the light went low and the tools went back on the pegboard hooks. And when he left, he did not feel the way he had when he arrived. Thursday was when it broke for Nathaniel in the way that things break, when the pressure has been building long enough that the specific moment seems almost arbitrary. He was eating a sandwich on the steps of the library, watching a man across the street argue with a parking meter, with the complete commitment of someone who has decided the meter is the problem, when his phone buzzed with a message from Priya, his assistant at the company, asking whether he wanted her to push the Thursday afternoon vendor call. He had forgotten there was a Thursday afternoon vendor call. He had forgotten there was a Priya waiting for his direction. He had been inside the week so completely that the company had stopped being real to him, which should have felt like a vacation, but felt instead like being set down outside of something he had mistaken for himself and being asked to look at it from the outside. He read the message 3 times. He put the phone back in his pocket. He ate the rest of the sandwich. The vendor call happened without him. He knew this because it was on the calendar, and the calendar was a machine that moved without his hand on it. That was what he had built. A system that ran when he was in it and ran when he was not in it. 11 people following processes he had documented and implemented. It was, by any external measure, a success. He sat on the steps a little longer than he needed to, and what arrived, quietly and without drama, was the thing he had been avoiding since Monday. The question of whether he had built the system because it was the right way to run a business, or because it kept him one step removed from the actual work, always directing, never accountable for the physical reality of anything going wrong. He thought about the gutters. He thought about the oranges on the sidewalk. He called his father. He did not know what he was going to say. Everett didn't answer. Nathaniel held the phone for a moment after the voicemail picked up and said, "I think I've been running the company like it's a project. I'll explain when I'm back." He ended the call. He sat with his sandwich wrapper and the parking meter argument across the street, which had concluded without resolution, and felt something clarify that had been blurred for long enough that he'd stopped noticing the blur. Theo spent Friday back at the garden. Vera was there again, and 2 other people he hadn't met. A retired high school teacher named Portia, who worked the herb beds with a focus that suggested the herbs had been assigned to her personally, and a young man named Dex, who had earbuds in one ear and was carefully staking tomato plants with the precise attention of someone who was new to this and wanted to get it right. Theo worked alongside them without needing to introduce himself as anything. Nobody asked where he worked. Nobody asked what he did. The work was available and he did it, and that was the entire conversation required. In the afternoon, Vera showed him how to read a plant that was getting too much water. "Not the leaves," she said. "The roots told you. You had to understand something you couldn't see from looking at the surface, and trust that the evidence was there if you looked in the right place." He wrote that down in his head in the particular way. He wrote things down that he actually meant to keep. That afternoon, Ruben Castillo came through the gate with a bag of tools. He had volunteered at the garden, it turned out, for 2 years. He and Vera were the kind of friends who didn't need to explain their friendship to anyone. Ruben sat up at the far bed and did not notice Theo at first, and when he did, he raised his chin in a way that meant he remembered, and Theo raised his chin back, and that was enough. At the end of the afternoon, Ruben said, "You know anything about freight dispatch?" Theo said he knew a little. His father ran a logistics company. Ruben looked at him for a moment. He said, "I've been trying to get back into route work. Nobody's called back in 4 months. I've applied to 14 companies." Theo said, "Write down your information." He did not say he could do anything. He did not know if he could do anything. But he took the paper Ruben wrote on and folded it and put it in his jacket pocket next to his library card. Nathaniel came home at noon on Monday with $31 and a drill bit that Warren had given him as a thank you, which he had accepted without ceremony. He set the money on the kitchen table, pulled out his notebook and pushed it toward Everett. Everett read it. The framework pages, the gutter diagram, the note Nathaniel had written on Thursday evening in the library. "I've been running things like a project manager. There's a difference between a project and a company. I think I stopped knowing which one I was doing." Everett turned the notebook over and set it down and did not speak immediately. That was one of his qualities. He never filled silence with noise just because the silence was available. He said, "How were the gutters?" Nathaniel said, "Level." Theo came in at 2 in the afternoon with $61. He had spent $20 on food over the week and found $17 in his jacket from before the week started, which he had included honestly in the accounting. He set the money down, and then set the folded paper with Ruben's information beside it. He explained who Ruben was. He explained 19 years of root work, the layoff, the 4 months of silence from the industry. Everett read the paper. He read the name and the phone number and the 2 lines about experience that Ruben had written in careful block letters, the way people write things they want to be taken seriously. Theo said, "I don't know if you're hiring. I don't know if he's right for anything. I just thought you should have it." Everett looked at his younger son for a long moment. He looked at the money. He looked at the paper. He said, "Sit down." He told them about the lot he had bought 3 years ago on the east side of the city, 2 miles from the original Drummond yard, where the first flatbed had been parked. It was 1.5 acres. He had been paying property taxes on it without telling anyone, including his accountant, which his accountant had noted with some displeasure when it surfaced. On the lot, he planned to build a vocational training center. Truck driving licensing, forklift certification, basic freight dispatch and logistics operations. A small dormitory on the upper floor for people coming out of halfway houses or transitional housing who needed 90 days of stable ground while they completed training. The building would not make money. It was not designed to make money. It was designed to produce people who could do the work that kept the country fed and supplied and moving. Work that Everett Drummond had done himself at 23, with a maxed-out fuel card and the specific kind of determination that comes from understanding that there is no one behind you. He had been watching his sons for 2 years. He had been waiting to see whether either of them had thought about anything beyond the company as it existed, beyond their position inside it. He had not expected Theo to bring him a name. He looked at the paper again. He picked up his phone in the second ring. Ruben asked 3 questions. He listened to the answers with his eyes on the window. He said, "Can you come in Thursday?" He hung up. He looked at both of his sons. He asked them the same question his own father had asked him at 23, standing in front of the first empty truck, before everything that came after. "What do you see when you look at something that isn't built yet?" Nathaniel went first. He talked about zoning and construction timeline and federal grant programs for vocational education, a competent answer delivered in the practiced register of someone who understood systems. He was halfway through the second point when he stopped. He looked at the table. He said, "I don't actually know what it should feel like to walk in there. I'd have to see it." Everett said nothing, but he registered the stopping. Theo was quiet for a moment. He said, "I think you need someone at the door on the first day who's been on the outside. Someone who knows what it costs to start over when you're not young. Because the people coming in will know immediately if the person at the door understands that or not." He did not suggest himself. He did not suggest Ruben. He was describing a quality, not applying for a position. Everett folded his hands on the table. The table was the original one from the first office. A folding table he'd brought to every building the company had ever occupied, a fact the accountant had tried to get him to retire for years. He kept it because it was not a statement. It was a record. He said, "I didn't do this to test you." Both of them looked at him. He said, "I did it because I realized I'd been building the company and not building you, and I couldn't fix that by adding it to a meeting agenda." He reached into the drawer at the side of the table. He took out a key on a plain ring, Schlage key, scratched from use. He set it in front of Theo. He said, "That's to the lot. There's nothing there yet. Go look at what isn't built." He took out a second thing, a single page, folded in thirds, his own handwriting across the top. He slid it to Nathaniel. It was the first route manifest from the first delivery. 2003, 3 drops. A chicken processing plant outside Beaumont and 2 restaurant supply warehouses on the west side. Nathaniel unfolded it. He read the handwriting, his father's handwriting, 20 years younger and moving faster across the page. He did not say anything. Everett said, "I need you to remember that this is where it started. Not the quarterly reports, not the optimization software. This page." He stood. He put his coffee cup in the sink. He looked out the kitchen window at the yard. Ruben Castillo came in on Thursday. He sat across from Everett at the folding table in the room with the one window that faced the original yard. He talked about 19 years without selling them or shrinking them, in the same voice he used at the taqueria counter, the voice of a man who had done real work and knew the weight of it precisely. Everett listened the way he listened to things that mattered, without interruption, without filling the ends of sentences, and without deciding until the silence after the last word had been given enough time to be sure it was the last word. He said, "I want you to run the dispatch training program. It doesn't exist yet. You'd be building it from what you know." Reuben looked at him. He did not say yes immediately. He asked 2 questions: whether the students would be driving real routes or simulated ones, and whether there was a way to connect graduates with freight companies that were actually hiring. Everett said yes to both. He said he already had commitments from 6 regional carriers, 3 of them Drummond clients, to interview any graduate who completed the program. Reuben sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "All right." He did not shake hands immediately. He looked around the room first, at the folding table, at the single window, at the route manifest still sitting at the edge of the table where Nathaniel had left it. He looked at it with the recognition of someone reading a document in a language he had spoken for 2 decades. He reached out and picked it up and turned it over. He put it back down. He said, "I know that route." Everett looked at him. Reuben said, "Beaumont plant and then the 2 warehouses off Katy Freeway. That's a Tuesday route. Still running, different carrier now. You've got to hit the plant before 7, or the dock is full for 2 hours." Everett said, "I know." They sat with that for a moment. 2 men who had both driven roads that most people moved along without knowing the names of, who had both spent years learning that the work underneath everything visible was the thing that kept everything visible in place. The vocational center opened on a Wednesday morning in the following April. There was no ceremony. Reuben arrived first, earlier than anyone expected. With a thermos and a set of binders he had put together over the winter, route maps and dispatch protocols, and a glossary of industry terminology that he had written out by hand, and then typed and then reformatted 3 times, until it was something he felt a person learning from scratch could actually use. He unlocked the door with the key that had his name on a small label Theo had written in ballpoint on a piece of tape. He turned on the lights. The room smelled like new drywall and the faint chemical readiness of a space that has been built for something and is waiting to meet it. There were 6 students enrolled in the first cohort. By the end of the week, there were 8. 2 of them had come from a transitional housing facility 4 blocks east. One had been driving informal freight in the informal economy for 7 years and was finally getting his commercial license. One was a woman who had managed a food pantry for a decade and understood supply chain in a way she had not yet had the credential to prove. Nathaniel redesigned his role at Drummond Logistics that spring. He gave the operations title to the senior dispatcher, who had been running the daily floor operations without the title for 2 years. He took a different responsibility. Coordinating the carrier partnerships for the vocational program, which required him to make calls where he was asking for something, rather than offering something, which was a different kind of conversation than he had been having, and one he was getting better at the more he made them. He still wore the clothes of a person who worked in a building, but he walked to the center twice a week and sat in on Reuben's sessions from the back of the room, and he did not speak unless someone asked him a question, which he thought was probably the most useful thing he had figured out about himself all year. Theo worked at the garden on Fridays. He also worked at the center 3 days a week, doing the intake coordination, meeting the people coming in, learning their situations, helping them figure out which part of the training made sense for where they were trying to go. He was good at it in the way that people are good at things when the work matches something that was always isn't them but needed the right context to become visible. He was not good at it because he had trained for it. He was good at it because he knew what it felt like to be on the outside of a system looking for a way in, and that knowledge had weight. And the people coming through the door could feel the weight when they sat across from him. Vera brought a flat of seedlings to the center in May. She planted a small bed along the south fence with Theo's help, herbs mostly, rosemary and sage, and a row of tomatoes that had no practical purpose in the context of a logistics training facility. She said, "People think better when there's something growing nearby. I can't prove that. I just know it's true." Nobody questioned her. The tomatoes came in by August. Everett sat in his truck outside the center on a Tuesday morning in June, the original Drummond truck, a detail that caused his accountant ongoing concern, and watched a group of students walk through the front door with the particular quality of motion that belongs to people who have somewhere to be that matters. He thought about the first morning he had driven the Beaumont route, pre-dawn, the highway empty, the truck fully loaded, the manifest on the passenger seat showing 3 drops and the weight of all of them. He had been 23 and had not known whether any of it was going to work and had driven anyway because there was nothing behind him and the road was in front of him, and that was enough to start. He watched the last student go through the door. He put the truck in gear. He had 3 meetings and a carrier call and a property appraisal on the lot next to the center that he was thinking about adding to the plan because the program was already waitlisted for the next 2 cohorts, and that was not a problem he had expected to have this soon, and it was the best kind of problem he had encountered in years. He drove. The road was in front of him the way it had always been, and he still knew how to read it.